All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to SEVA VentRounds. Today is April 22nd, 2025. And the topic of this today is discordant detection, and we'll see a little bit regarding the use of esophageal pressure to do so. All right. Our disclosure is there is no endorsement of any mode, ventilator, or manufacturer. Whatever we say, it's our opinion. It does not represent the Cleveland Clinic. There's my disclosures as well as Rob's. Remember, just keep your microphone muted. If you want to comment, you are welcome to unmute it to make the comment, but otherwise keep it continuously muted and use the chat function in WebEx for any comments that you may want to have or discuss. There are CRCEs. If you're a respiratory therapist, please take advantage of this.
I'm like so disconnected with the New York scene. I just go.
And let's get started with some key SEVA knowledge. And in this graph that I'm showing here is a cartoon that represents the airway pressure on the top panel right here, followed by the flow, the esophageal pressure, and this one also includes the electrical activity of the diaphragm. And the reason why we put this is because you can see, and I would ask you to start from looking from all the way at the bottom of the graph and then move up. And as you start looking from the bottom of the graph, you can see that the electrical activity of the diaphragm rises, and as it starts increasing the electrical activity, that's where the breath starts. That's where the neural signal starts to increase. And it reaches a peak, and then it decreases completely. And if you move up to the level where the esophageal pressure is, you're going to see that there's a delay in the amount of time that it takes for the pressure in the thorax to start going down from where the electrical activity starts. And so there's some lag from that electrical activity, and then the pressure starts dropping in the thorax, and you see the drop in pressure until it peaks, and then it relaxes again. And finally, you have the flow, and you can see that as the pressure starts dropping, it triggers a breath, the flow increases, and that manifests at the airway pressure with a little drop in the pressure and then a pressurization of the system. So that would be the trigger, but the message here is electricity starts, the electrical activity starts before, then it starts progressing, and the esophageal pressure starts dropping, that's followed by flow, and then followed by the an airway pressure. So there's this lag that exists. And then for cycling, or the end of the breath, you can see that you reach a peak on the electrical activity of the diaphragm, which may not match the peak of the electrical or the drop in the pressure in the thorax. And this we can consider that the muscle, even though the brain is sending a signal, the muscle cannot contract more, and so it has reached its maximum that it's going to contract. So there's some level of neuromechanical uncoupling that occurs on those levels, and you will see that the pressure waveform and the flow waveform will lag behind where the breath ended. And then finally, the end of the breath. So this is just relevant when we talk about synchrony. The esophageal pressure can really give you more insight. It moves you closer to the electrical activity of the diaphragm and see the waveform changes. And this is a image that we created. Although it doesn't have an esophageal balloon, it has a catheter in the esophagus. And this is just to demonstrate, because not all the time it's evident to all our caregivers where the esophageal balloon stands. And what you can see here at this level of cutting, you have the endotracheal tube, you have the trachea, and you have the esophagus, which in this case is full of air, but in the center you can see that there is a radio-opaque structure, and that's the catheter that is going to the stomach. And you can see the relationship with the posterior wall of the trachea close by, as well as with the lung side by side. As you move down, you can see the next cut. It's a little bit above the carina. And you can see the airway, and there's no ET tube anymore there. And you can see the esophagus with the catheter inside, and how it's related to here, the side of the aorta, but on the other side, very closely related to the pleura, but again, the posterior wall of the trachea. And as you move lower, and this last cut that I put over here, you can see the relationship with the catheter and the heart and the pleural space. And now the airway is gone. So when we put an esophageal catheter, we actually try to push it below the area, so below the carina, so that it's not getting the signals from the airway, and before and pulling it back so that it's not completely behind the heart, so it can transmit the signals from the pleural space. And you can rapidly realize that there can be several errors that occur when in placement, but it's just important just to point out to you the close relationship of the esophagus with the pleural space, and that's how we use this as a surrogate because of the flexibility of the esophagus and the transmission of the signal. All right. So here's the waveform, and as a good citizen, we decided to block the esophageal pressure so that first we can read the waveforms over here. And at the level that you are today, I think that you will rapidly recognize what is going on here. But I thought that starting by what you can see at the bedside, and which is very relevant because not everybody gets an esophageal balloon, and then going from there and looking at the esophageal balloon image. So let's start by the tag. And if you want to write in the tag in your chat, what is the tag for this mode? For those of you that are using the vent mode map app that it's out there, this is a Hamilton C6 ventilator. And rapidly, I see our teams populating this as pressure control, CMVS. And what does that mean? So remember, the commercial name sounds great, but the tag tells you what actually the mode is doing. And in this case, what we're saying is that this mode controls the pressure. And so it means that during every single one of the breaths, the pressure is controlled. So the flow is going to be dependent on the respiratory system characteristics. So the elastance, the resistance, and the PMOS. And then we said that all breaths, so CMV means that it's continuous mandatory ventilation. So all breaths are mandatory. And that means that it can be triggered by the patient or the ventilator and cycled by the ventilator in this case. And what you will see in this circumstance is that the ventilator will tell you when the patient is triggering or when it thinks that the patient is triggering. And it does that by placing a little triangle or a signal, or sometimes it changes the color of the waveform. Sometimes it puts in a corner an S or an A, depending on what ventilator you have. But the ventilator would alert you that this is a patient-triggered breath. And in this case, in this particular ventilator, we would want to see a little triangle that looks like something like this, and it will be the color of what you're using. And you don't see any evidence of a trigger of this triangle. So that means that all these breaths are mandatory. So they have been triggered by time. And actually, you rapidly can see that the interval between these ones, each breath is regular. So the expiratory time, inspiratory time is constant. So these are all mandatory breaths. And finally, set point stands for the targeting scheme, meaning how the ventilator controls the how the computer in the ventilator controls the breath. And when you use set point is the most basic targeting scheme, and essentially you, the operator, have entered all the variables. So you have said how high the pressure is going to be, how long the inspiratory time is going to be, how frequent the breaths are going to occur. And so that's what set point stands for. And so this, in this case, it's pressure controlled CMVS. I see a comment. It seems that the trigger variable is P, even though there is no patient trigger breath. And that's possible. And I presume you're saying that, Ariel, because you're seeing the pressure, the flow crossing. But I would say that unless there's any other marker, if you set the flow very high, or you say the flow threshold very high, that may cause that. And I presume that's what you are referring to. So it's possible that it's pressure, but just remember that the inappropriately set threshold can be the cause of this. Very good. Good points. Thank you, Ariel, for bringing that up. All righty. So the next question is, what is the load? Is it elastic, resistive, or PMOS? And when we say PMOS, that's not a load, but it's a manifestation of PMOS that sometimes hides the load, elastic or resistive. There you go. I start seeing some people pop in. So remember, as we look at because we're on pressure control, that's the importance of knowing the tag. Your eyes should go and look at the flow, all right? And what you're trying to see is how fast is the flow returning to baseline. And as you start looking at these waveforms, I'm gonna draw for the sake of how it would look. One of the tricks that I use to read the waveforms is to imagine how it would look if it was passive. So if it was passive, the flow waveform would look like this, and it would decay exponentially. Well, that was pretty fast, like that. And then when it finishes, it would return to baseline like that. Now, this may be too short in time, but you want to see that exponential decay. And then if you look at because this is, you want to look at the waveforms, and usually I compare all of them, and you can see that some of them reach baseline, some of them do not reach baseline by the end of the breath. You see that, how this one reached baseline, this doesn't, this one doesn't, closer. So that makes me think that something is changing during inspiration. I see a little bit of exponential decay, but it's not the most pretty in the world, and that will happen to you. Especially in this, when the sensor is in the Y of the ventilator, and so close to the endotracheal tube, your waveforms are not going to look as pretty. They may have distortions from just the flow moving back and forth, but you rapidly can see, well, it's coming back. There may be some exponential decay. It's not perfect. So I'm not convinced, but at least it doesn't look like the resistance is increased. And then I look at my expiratory waveform, and you see the exponential decay, and it returns to baseline relatively in a good term. So I would say that probably the load is mainly elastic, which is the normal feature. You normally have more elastic load than resistive load. But I do see some PMOS, Rana, without a doubt. I suspect the presence of PMOS because it's oscillating from breath to breath. So here you see how this concavity is lost, perhaps here, maybe a little bit there. So I would say that there's PMOS, and then during exhalation, there's PMOS, and we can talk about that in a second. So that's how I would have read this, as elastic and normal. And then the next question is, well, what's the PV discordance? And so if we start by the trigger, the question is, it's normal, early, late, false, or failed. Yeah, absolutely. rapidly. You guys are starting to see, and I see you guys reading that this looks like a failed trigger, and that and the characteristics of that come in part just focusing on the first breath. You can see that the flow crossed above baseline and then below, uh, and then you see the drop in pressure during that correlates with that. So this is consistent or suspicions for a failed trigger. Now, Ariel said, well, those could be cardiogenic oscillations. Certainly they could be. There are some features that you want to see when there's cardiogenic oscillations, as is the frequency is usually faster. So you'll see them a little bit more regular. And so, but you here can see one, you see another failed trigger over here. You see that how it crosses, but it does, and it drops the pressure, but it doesn't trigger a breath. So I see, my eyes can see one here, one here, one here, and one here. And so this makes me to suspect that those are cardiac, failed triggers for these patients. So those are the ones that I can detect on immediate eyesight. Now, as you know, whenever we do this, usually the first one you see is what you treat. But in terms of inspiration, do you see any evidence of, I mean, in the breaths, in the mandatory breaths, I don't see much PMOS. I suspect there may be some, but I cannot tell completely. So I would say that this just looks like perhaps if this is intentional or not, over assistance, because there's not much PMOS there, but it could be just assistance. The cycle, I will not even read it. An expiration seems to be passive. I would read that as normal. So I'm going to show you now, and this is why the esophageal balloon is useful. I mean, it may not change the management that you may have for this patient, but I'll show you the esophageal balloon so you get a better idea of the activity that it's occurring. And now it becomes more evident. So you just to orient you to what you're seeing right now, in this graph over here, you have the esophageal pressure, and you see the cardiac oscillations that which are normal to see in the esophageal, and then you see how the pressure dips, which is a marker of inspiratory effort. That's what you would expect to see, and then it relaxes, it returns back to baseline, and then again another dip, which is consistent with an effort. So one effort here, another effort here, 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 and here. Those are the ones that we see. So those are all inspiratory efforts, and we didn't measure it, so I cannot tell you the amplitude of each one of those events, but that's something that you can measure, and it will give you a manifestation on how much effort the respiratory muscles are generating. And then on the bottom panel, you can see that the transpulmonary pressure is the manifestation of the pressure of the airway. So the pressure inside the airway. So the pressure in minus the pressure outside. All right, minus the pressure outside. So this is the pleural pressure, or this is a surrogate of the pleural pressure. And so what you will see here, the pressure during this part is essentially zero. So the pressure in minus the pressure out, because there was no pressure there, the pressure remained about the same. So you can see that it looks, the waveforms are almost identical. And then during this period of time, the pressure is positive, it's above zero, and that's because the pressure in the airway is higher, and here is zero, so the pressure in the airway is, if the transpulmonary pressure is higher, that meaning that it's distending the alveoli. And then you see here the effort from the effort from the patient. And so this is a negative effort. So remember, the pressure inside the airway, which here is positive, minus the negative pressure here. So minus minus gives you a positive pressure. So that's why you see this as a positive right here. And now you can see distortions on the waveform, in this waveform, that are related to the pressure waveform. So here you see this little hump here is related to this one over here, but there was no pressure over here. So as you start looking at this, now you can see this is an effort over here, and you see another one here. And you remember that we were talking about how the flow was different between these breaths. And now you can see why was that, because the patient was doing an inspiratory effort, and because the inspiratory effort was occurring, the flow is higher than on this one. And on this one, the respiratory, the patient was essentially passive during that period of time, and it reached basically zero. Here the patient does inspiratory effort, so the flow goes above baseline, and then exhales, and then the patient takes a breath, the machine delivers a breath, and the patient does effort, and as the patient does effort, the flow ends up higher. So these little variations that we said, you know, the only reason why this would be different is that the presence of PMOS, but I could not see it. But now in retrospect, I could say, oh yeah, I look at the peak expiratory flow, it's different in height than in the other one. So if we had stayed there for a while, you could have said, oh yeah, there's PMOS there, and you would have recognized these events as PMOS. This just made it easier. And there's studies out there that now demonstrate that the presence of esophageal pressure, either simulated or the true one, helps you read patient-ventilator interactions a little bit better. And so I think that this is an important feature for you I mean, we rarely put an esophageal balloon to detect esophageal, to detect synchrony issues. Should we? Perhaps. But I think that the waveforms give you, I mean, you should treat these the same way, which is this patient is having failed triggers with an elastic load. So that is consistent, or should raise the suspicion for you that this patient is over assisted. And so, or that the threshold for the ventilator is set very high, and that's why you're seeing this, and the patient should have been triggering here without a doubt. I mean, if this was a flow trigger, as Ariel pointed out, all of these would have been synchronous breaths, which are not in this case. Again, I will also point out that the oscillations, at least on the esophageal pressure tracing, are not gorgeous or else. I'll pause there. Rob, I see you on the line. Do you have any comments?
No. I think it was interesting what you said, that if you are very good at looking at the flow waveform, you would have got most of what you got from the esophageal pressure. It's just that the esophageal pressure makes it easier to appreciate.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I would just highlight that on one way that I see these, and you've heard us talk about discordances that should make you stop at the bedside, stop immediately, and this is one of those. This essentially is behaving as a third-degree AV block, in which the ventilator is going on its own and the patient is going completely off sync. And so these should stop you and come back and say, well, why is this? Is this an inappropriately set trigger threshold, which could certainly be just based on what I'm seeing here, or is this over assistance, or what do I need to do? Is this severe obstruction and auto PEEP? Not the case, because the resistance doesn't seem to be increased, but it requires action from the team. All righty. I'm looking for any other comments or questions from the team. So if I think about the key findings, we have reviewed, first of all, that you can, just by looking at the waveforms, recognize the features of a failed a failed trigger. And those are the presence of changes in flow that do not, and or pressure that do not lead to the trigger of the ventilator. And you saw those over here as changes. I mean, this is crossing the baseline and not triggering, and dropping the pressure and not triggering a breath. And that gets confirmed very nicely with esophageal. Now, the magnitude of this may be too small, but still, it's a patient that is trying to breathe at that point. So those are breaths. A failed trigger is a fully unassisted or under-assisted breath, in which they are doing all the effort and the ventilator is not responding to what they want. Now, this may be intentional. You may want that for whatever reason in the clinical work that you want, but that's, if it's not intentional, a failed trigger should stop you and saying there's major discordance here. The second one is that it's evident to us that the esophageal pressure, when done appropriately, will help you read discordances much better if you have challenges in reading the waveforms, as you saw here. Gives you another or additional information about the pressure done by the muscle and the timing of what is occurring. And I would just highlight for you as a user of ventilators that in this case, what you see here is a cursor, and that cursor only appears when you freeze the screen. But if you freeze the screen, then you will be able to move that cursor, and that will help you to time events and to see where the timing of the event is occurring. So using the cursors and freeze functions on your screens will help you read these much better. Rob, any other comments or take-home message?
No, that's pretty good.
All right, Ariel, go ahead.
Eduardo, sorry if my voice sounds a little weird. This band has something called IntelliSync,
Yes.
which goes based on the deflection. I would have loved to see a change in the trigger variable, because IntelliSync is more prone to pick up those missed efforts.
Yes. My volume is a little bit low, so I'm gonna rephrase what you said. So if I make an error, please tell me. But what you're saying is that if this had been using a different type of trigger, for example, the IntelliSync, which is uses an algorithm to optimize the sensitivity and minimize these failed triggers, that this could have been a solution for this circumstance. Albeit, and you have commented this before, Ariel, that it also may lead to false triggers when there's cardiac oscillations playing along. Am I reading you correctly?
No, you're saying correct. What would have done is try to get an image with IntelliSync and see how it behaves in this case, since we have the PS tracing.
Yes. Yeah, this is a retrospective image, not from one of our patients, but you're absolutely right. It would have been good to see if that improved the synchrony based on what we do. Thank you for highlighting that, Ariel. Any other comments from the audience or questions? In the meantime, I would highlight this is the CME for CCF caregivers. Please log in and put in your code. And just remember that we are open for all your waveforms. We love when we get waveforms, and we will put them on. And the SEVA Summit is open for September. So if you're interested in reading more and doing method, Optivent, or Monitor, please log into the registry page, put it in, and if you're a CCF provider, it's free of charge. If you're from outside, there's a charge for attending, but we would welcome you with open arms to learn along with us. Right. Thank you all, and have a great day.